Let me share with you a vision of the future which offers hope. Let us turn to the very strengths in technology that spawned our great industrial base and that have given us the quality of life we enjoy today.
Hello, and welcome to WorkForce Wearables. This is where we talk with experts in the field to take a close look at worker and workforce safety and how technology is being used to impact those on the front lines, with a special focus on wearable technology. On our very first episode of WorkForce Wearables, we're going to visit with Nate Brayman to talk principle and practicality in safety and get his take on safety and technology. So before we get started, don't forget you can catch all of our upcoming episodes by finding us and liking us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, whatever social media platform you prefer, and make sure you never miss an episode. Again, I'm Nicole with MakuSafe, and I want to introduce my co-host, Tom West.
Hey, Nicole, really excited about the opportunity to do these interviews and very excited to talk with Nate today. I think we've got an interesting slate of upcoming guests already, which is terrific, but really happy to kick it off with you and with Nate.
Awesome. So let's introduce our first special guest. Our guest, Nate Brayman, has a ton of experience, including everything ranging from being a United States Marine Corps veteran, working with Berkshire Hathaway, Energy, AccuStats, and launching isitrecordable.com. So welcome, Nate.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And if you don't mind, Nate, can you tell us a little bit about your background and experience in your work in the safety field?
Yeah, certainly. Well, my journey to safety started as a firefighter in the Marine Corps. I basically got lucky. When you get into the Marine Corps, you don't get to choose your MOS. At least back in the day when I joined, you couldn't. 2002, you could only choose from a like a certain series. So I picked 7000 series, and I could have been ordnance, aircraft ordnance. I could have been aircraft recovery, which I think is going behind lines and recovering pilots and black boxes from aircraft or technology, that sort of thing. But I ended up getting the which was at the time the second most desirable job in the Marine Corps, which was crash fire rescue. And so I feel very fortunate that I did. I got certified as a firefighter, and then I ended up getting injured, and I couldn't continue. I was given the option in the Marine Corps. They said, well, you could stay in, but you probably won't get promoted anymore. At the time, I was a Lance Corporal, so I couldn't get promoted anymore because I couldn't complete my physical fitness test with the injury. So they said you could either stay in, and I did stay in for about another 9 months, just going through therapy and trying to heal. But it was one of those things, like, it's a back injury, so you never know. Sometimes it doesn't heal. So they said, well, you could stay in and not get promoted. You could finish out your 4 years, or you could get out on a medical discharge. It's honorable discharge, and then and go back to school or do whatever you want to do. So I opted for that one. Went back and got my degree in fire science. I was thinking about becoming an arson investigator. Took classes in that. So I got my, I went to DMAC, went to got my fire science degree, and then from there I thought, well, a lot of these jobs, there's not a lot of fire, like arson investigator type jobs. They don't pay that great, and there's a lot of competition for them. And most of those jobs are filled by retired firefighters or retired police officers. And I thought, what else could I do here that's more reasonable, more practical? So I looked at Iowa State University. So I was born and raised in Ames, Iowa, or Iowa State University. My grandpa went there, my aunt went there, my dad went there, like everybody that I know went there. So I thought, oh, okay, I want to go there, get my bachelor's degree. And so I started looking on ways I could try to stem from my firefighting background, and occupational safety jumped out at me. And there's a lot of good jobs. Starting pay for the jobs at the time was like $55,000 for a bachelor's degree. So a lot of my friends who graduated were getting $55K right out the door, right out of college, which was phenomenal at the time. And ended up using my GI Bill for that, and also stuck around and got my master's degree in occupational safety as well from Iowa State University. So from there, I got hired on at Berkshire Hathaway Energy, and have been working there for about 8 years now.
Well, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about your role at BHE. I know you're in the safety department, but you've got kind of a unique perspective there, don't you?
Oh, certainly. It's actually a pretty unique position because Berkshire Hathaway Energy is unique in the sense that it's a compilation of several businesses. It's a holdings company, essentially. And there are all different kinds of businesses that they own, including a real estate company that's in all 50 states. There are natural gas pipelines, compressor stations, mixed combined cycle energy plants. They have all kinds of renewables operations, and they have mining operations, and it's global. One of the companies is out of Canada, another one is out of the UK. And so it's a really, there's unique challenges to working in that kind of situation. Every business already has their own safety team. So, sort of a support role. I'm there to support those safety teams, but it's also kind of like herding cats when you're trying to coordinate everybody. It gets to be quite the challenge. But it forces you to rely on persuasion, not strong arming somebody, not saying, well, this is what we're doing because I said so. It's a lot of, this is why I think this is the right thing to do, and then learning how to communicate effectively and compromise with people. It's definitely taught me that communication is difficult. It's probably way harder than we think it is. You think, oh, I can just send an email to a group of people, and then they got
Not
it.
when people are involved, right?
Not when people are involved.
Right.
Never.
And more specifically there, you're supporting those BHE businesses in a role that is really focused on safety data and analytics, right?
Oh yeah, big time.
Mhm.
Yes, and that has its all unique challenges as well, because it's like garbage in, garbage out. If you're collecting data and the data is no good, then what's the point in processing and spending all this time, analyzing it? If it's no good in the first place, you're just spinning your wheels.
Mhm. So are you establishing KPIs and metrics that may be useful to the safety leaders of those different operating companies?
Well, that's a complicated question. There's a lot of chefs in the kitchen there, and not just in the safety world, but in a corporate setting, you have executives that you're dealing with, and they have their own ideas, and they have the things they've always done, and that work for them. And each business has its own executive team, and then on top of that, you have boards, the boards that these executives are reporting to. That just a little safety manager like me, I don't have a line to those board people, so, and they're the ones that often will set the KPIs, or they'll say, this is what we want to see. And usually it's like a lagging indicator, such as the number of injuries. They just, all they say is, hey, I want to see this number and I want to see it go down.
Yeah, interesting. Well, first and foremost, thanks for your service. But I kind of want to tell a little story about how you and I got to know each other. Early on in MakuSafe, I was poking around on LinkedIn and looking for like-minded individuals and people who had something to say in the safety world, and I came across this crazy red bearded guy who seemed like on his lunch hour went out to his car, started a video recorder, and just started to rant about how we're probably incenting people to report the wrong things. And it was just that lagging indicator versus leading indicator argument that is near and dear to our hearts at MakuSafe. But I reached out to you and said, really loved your post. I think your thoughts are spot on, and love to talk to you sometime. And I think you and I got on the phone at one point and realized we were both based in Des Moines. And then we founded a friendship and started talking a little bit more and more, and had you to the office and told you a little bit about what we're doing. So I really appreciate your perspective, and I find you fascinating to talk to. I know yeah, thanks very much. I know in the past you've talked about viewing safety through two different lenses. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So it's interesting because a lot of my history, I've made these mistakes. and I've grown and learned, and I want to share my lessons learned from these mistakes that I've made personally and that I've seen other people make. And I found probably the best way to explain it is to talk about the lens of practicality and the lens of principles. And the lens of principles is what you should apply first. Essentially, it's what can I do ethically, what fits within my morals, my moral framework, to achieve my goals. And that's always should be the first lens you look at, because you don't want to do something that's immoral to achieve your goals. And then the next step is applying the lens of practicality. And that's important because you can't just be purely principle, because that kind of stuff usually, you have to deal with the real world. Like whenever somebody says, well, it should be this way, it's like, well, okay, that's only half of the argument. You need to find a way to make it practical. You have to be pragmatic about it. And so it's like, we should, in principle, be able to track lagging indicators, right? What's wrong with that, right? If you don't go any deeper, in principle, it should be fine, because yes, you're trying to reduce the number of injuries. What's wrong with that? And a lot of people will say that, and they stop there and they say, oh, well, let's just set our goal at 0. And then what's wrong with that? Are you saying that if we set it at 5, that means that we're accepting injuries or something like that? And it's like, well, let's look and see what happens in the real world practically to see if that's a reasonable goal. And as it turns out, you end up just damaging your ability to communicate with your employees, because now their goals are tied to this number on a piece of paper. Yeah. And they simply will find ways not to report so that they can achieve that goal and end up with the total amount of their incentives, whatever that is. So you have to apply the lens of principle, but then you also have to apply the lens of practicality to see, well, how does this actually work out in the real world? You have to do both.
Completely agree. And I think it is a useful reminder to consider multiple perspectives, right, when you're trying to arrive at an answer. I'm kind of curious, if you don't mind me interjecting this one as well, Nicole, about your views on behavior-based safety, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and the latest movement toward more of a holistic approach, right? HOP, or human organizational performance. Any common pitfalls or challenges or gripes or complaints you see about BBS, behavior-based safety? And
Yeah.
What things do you think are important in a more holistic approach?
Yeah, it's interesting. So BBS, there's a lot of good ideas there, and I think that there is some value there. But I think that it's, if you look at how people behave and the way that people act in the workplace, people are distracted. Like studies have shown that people are distracted 47% of the time, and that's not anything you're going to be able to change with any sort of program. It just takes brain power to do that, and people get tired. You can only focus so long, and they're even in some studies they're finding that shortening the workday is getting people to be more productive, because then they have more time to rest, so they can come in and do more quality work rather than sitting at a even at a desk trying to do work for 8 hours. You just start to drain your batteries, and you can't stay focused forever. And so BBS to me comes across as trying to fix the human, and you can't fix the human. You can't fix human. People are people, and probably been this way for thousands of years, and there's not going to be any changing it.
Just to interject, I completely agree there, right? If something goes wrong, if there's a near miss or a good catch or an incident, the target shouldn't immediately be, what did that person do wrong? There's probably a better explanation. We need to look a little bit deeper.
Yes. You have to look at the system. And now I'm not discounting BBS. I do think that the system is 90%. I agree with Deming. Deming said, well, he said a couple different metrics throughout his lifetime. He started lower, like 80%. He eventually moved it up to like 95%. So there's different quotes from him at different varying percentages, but about 90% is to be blamed on the system, and 10% is to be blamed on the person making mistakes or whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, I care about that 10% or 5% or whatever that last piece is, but you're going to get more bang for your buck focusing in on the system itself. So
Yep.
you shouldn't necessarily ignore the human side of things. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying that why focus most of your energy on the 10%? You should focus more of your energy on where you're going to get value back.
Right. Somebody, recently reminded me, if you've got a long-term employee who's been there for 10 years and has been a stellar performer, and on the first day of their 11th year, they have an incident or something occurs, there's probably a reason why their behavior may have changed. And more often than not, they were trying to do the right thing.
Right. Yeah. How
Yeah.
many people are going to come to work and try to get hurt? I mean,
Right.
it's the rare exception,
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Right.
just to pipe in a little bit, I know we were talking about data earlier, Nate, and I know you geek out on data like we do at MakuSafe. So thinking about some of these concepts, how do you think data analytics, machine learning, AI can be used in your view to shift from a reactive approach to more of a proactive approach to managing
Yes.
safety?
Yeah, that's a great question. It really comes down to learning. You have to learn about the problems in order to fix them. If you have a problem you don't know about, you can't fix it. So how do we learn? Well, we learn by communication. And because, the safety manager or the executives, they can do field engagements or they could do field visits, and you can collect some data there, but you can't be omnipotent. You can't be at all places at all times. And so you have to rely on the employees to communicate to you the information about what's going right, what's going wrong, and what problems are they facing. And so that's our only way, is building communication pipelines. And then you have to identify the barriers to those communication pipelines. And you have to aggressively eliminate those barriers. Well, the number one biggest barrier is fear, right? The fear of what happens if I report this, or the fear of social criticism, like, well, what if I ruin the goal for the company and no one gets paid out their $500 or whatever it is? No one wants to be the guy that breaks that or ruins the incentive for everybody. I mean, imagine somebody, and it can happen this way more often than you think, where there's a payout and it's coming just before Christmas so everyone can buy Christmas presents or something, and then an injury happens because of an unsafe condition in the workplace. Well, they don't want to report it and ruin everyone's incentive that everyone was, planning on to buy presents for their kids or whatever. No one's going to want to do that. So that's a barrier to communication, is fear. And not only that, but you have the barrier of pride. People are just, if you trip, you mess up or you mess something up, and especially if you knew better, the last thing you want to do is tell everyone you screwed up, right? So there's a lot of built-in barriers to communication, and we need that for learning. So when it comes to data, that data is it's like a gold mine. There's all this nuggets of gold everywhere, but how do you get it out of the mine? With all these communication barriers, and then you have all these other people not understanding the practical problems with setting KPIs and correctly setting them on outcomes. You have all these barriers and you have no control over it. So the best way to do it is to eliminate the people from the situation, which is why I like Wearables, because you're building a communication pipeline that has no barriers, right? Unless somebody somehow, gets in and tinkers with it, or what. Maybe there are some ways to cause problems, and you guys would know more about that than me, and I'm sure you've built it in a way to try to eliminate those things. But yeah, I mean, it's all about learning communication, and if you don't have good data, you can't identify trends or patterns or anything. So it's so important to have a good, clean, trustworthy set of data.
One of the things that we believe in wholeheartedly is that a extraordinarily important type of data is those near miss reports and observations from the front line, right, that do get communicated, just like you're saying. Interesting side note here, I'm wondering what you have to say about this, but since the inception of MakuSafe, I've been looking for somebody who's done a study and quantified the actual number of near misses that go unreported, and I can't find it with good reason. It's really hard to study. Everybody agrees that they're severely underreported, though. They do go on in many cases. You're spot on to talk about the biggest reason why things don't get reported from the front lines, which is often referred to, summed up as psychological factors. Those psychological factors are things like fear of how I will be perceived by others, fear of how I will be perceived by leadership. So I think anytime we can break down those communication barriers and get more of that frontline data, that's a source of data too, right? Not just what you have to mine out of systems or, key cards or machine, permissions, but that the insights and optics that frontline workers are able to provide, that may be the most meaningful type of data that we can get. Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, Deming, one of my heroes, and I'll keep mentioning Deming because I think that he really was onto something that applies to safety, even though he was applying it to other types of errors, right? But in safety, we focus on errors that hurt people. So they're all errors. We just focus on this certain category, so it applies evenly. But one of the things that he said was, where there's fear, there are incorrect figures. So, right to your point, the psychological factors there play a huge role in our ability to communicate effectively with the front lines and get clean, trustworthy data. To your point about near miss reports, I like to categorize. So near miss reports you can learn from. They're very important because it's a source of learning, and that's the goal, is learning. So there's all other sources, hazard recognitions. You don't have to wait until something happens, because near miss is insinuating that something happened and it didn't bite somebody. Maybe we got lucky, right? Near miss. But if you have employees actively seeking for hazards, that's also learning, where it wasn't out of luck that they didn't get hurt, but they're proactively seeking these things. So hazard recognition. And then another one I like to call good catches. So I combine those together in a metric called near miss hazard recognition good catch. And then if you abbreviate it, it's NMHRGC. And then we started calling them NMRGICs. Okay. Well, there's a program that I worked with a gentleman named John Brown. He's general manager out at a mining operation. They have both surface and underground mining operations. And mining is a very hazardous environment. And he rolled out a program where he did everything he could to eliminate communication barriers. And he ended up getting something like I hope I remember this right. I think it was about 2,000 of these reports every year, which is, a few a day. And some of them are significant. So imagine getting several of these reports every single day as a manager, and having to, and manually, right, in a mine, it's not electronic, it was manually submitted. Imagine getting these things in and having to keep on top of them every single day. And it may have been 2,000 a month. So I may be vastly underestimating the number. So I'll have to double check with him and find out and let you know. But there are a lot of near misses that occur. And even then, even if you have the best reporting culture and you've done everything you could to eliminate fear, you're still not going to get 100% reporting, right? But it's a large number of events that got reported, and it's very difficult to stay on top of that. And then you also have compliance issues, where if a hazard is reported to you, now under the general duty clause of OSHA, now that it's a known hazard. So the general duty clause says every employer is required to provide a work environment that's free from recognized hazards. So if an employee has reported a recognized hazard to you, now legally and morally, ethically, you're obligated to mitigate that hazard. So it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge to do it, but it's the right thing to do for sure.
That's fascinating to me. I would have to assume that was a dramatic increase over what they were getting reported previously.
Yes, and it coincided with a 55% reduction in their injuries too, because they now had their employees looking for hazards. And
so that's a good segue into what I was going to ask next. which is you kind of alluded to this, right? By breaking down communication barriers, by engaging the front lines, by asking for those reports and then demonstrating the ability to act on them or do something about it, that process over time yielded great results. Are there any other thoughts you have, or maybe you want to talk about those facets some more? Best practices of leaders when it comes to safety management on the front lines that
Hmm.
you think are key?
Well, yeah, I guess the other part of that is follow up. It's so important for the manager to not just ignore them.
Mhm.
And another unseen benefit is the psychological factor of habituation, it's called. So there was one situation, this is an actual injury that happened where, so you have these guys who, as they go through the mines, they will bolt, they're called bolters, essentially. They bolt up these cages to the ceiling so that if rocks are falling or come loose from the ceiling, they won't hit somebody. And so they use these really long bolts and cages. And what happens is obviously sometimes those bolts, when they remove it, they'll move the cage after they're done in that area and they'll move it around. Well, when they remove the bolts, well, sometimes the bolts break. Well, there was one bolt that was right about eye level that had sheared off. And so it was this jagged, sharp piece of metal sticking out of the side of the wall. Everybody knew it was there. Everyone had seen it a million times, and everyone, would move out of the way rather than just cutting it off or, grinding it down or something. And this was before the Nearmiss reporting program was put in place. Okay. And so what happens is it's a natural thing. People tend to stop seeing things after they've been a certain way for so long. That's why signage is not that effective, because you see the sign once, you see it twice, and then you stop seeing it. This is why grocery stores will change the locations of all their food, and it makes everyone so mad. It's like, oh, I don't know where anything is now. Well, they're doing that because people are they like habits, and you go in, you buy the same things you always buy, and you stop seeing everything else. And the grocery store doesn't like that because you don't buy as much. So when they move everything around, now suddenly everything's new and you have to look through everything in order to find the things that you're looking for. And inevitably, you see some things that you want to buy. So they understand this idea of habituation. And in the workplace, it's no different. When you've gone through the workplace, I don't know, 1,000 times, you've been working at a place for 5 years, and how many times do you see the same things every single day? So getting the employee to slow down and actually look at their environment, and for the Nearmiss program, I think it made them see their work environment through new eyes, and it kind of disrupted that habituation that they had gotten into. And so those kinds of things where with the bolt sticking out of the wall, an employee ended up getting distracted once. So they walked past it 1,000 times. One time they got distracted, they forgot about it, it gashed him, and he almost lost his eye. And so it could have, if it got any higher, he would have lost his eye. And so um, that stuff doesn't happen anymore with this type of program, because the employees are incentivized to actually look for these hazards ahead of time, rather than just putting the company in a reactive standpoint where they just react after an injury happens.
That's got to be a
Nate,
dramatic improvement. I'm sorry, Nicole, I'm
that's all right.
just curious, any thoughts about then what frontline safety leaders should do or should say, right? How should that conversation that should be happening all the time on the front lines with safety supervisors and the people who are telling them things,
Mhm.
right? What should that sound like?
Yeah, the probably the most effective way that I found to do that is to not go out there acting like I know anything. Go out there and ask them, say, even asking a question, what's the most dangerous thing about what you're doing? And then they can tell you that, because they're going to know it better than anyone. They're going to know it better than you. You're not, anybody who does something every single day, day in and day out, they're going to know it better. Like, I don't care what kind of degrees you have. If you're not the one there doing it, you're not going to know it as well as they are. So again, it's like it's a gold mine. There's all this information that they have, they can offer it to you. You just have to find ways to remove that barrier so that they
Based
communicate.
on my background, you mentioned Deming, so I'll bring up one of my heroes. Ken Blanchard, who turned out to be an acquaintance and a friend in a business relationship, wrote a book a long time ago called The 1 Minute Manager. And I describe that as kind of the fundamental playbook for all supervision, leadership. But he talks about specifically making time to go look and talk with your people and catch them doing things right, which is a lot harder than telling, right? Asking and being engaged and being specific. If all you're doing with your frontline workers is saying, hey, thanks for your effort, good job today, shaking hands, it kind of looks like you're running for political office.
Yeah, yeah. And isn't that interesting? Because people typically, if it's not broken, they don't want to fix it, you know?
Mhm.
So you want to focus in on what's wrong and fix that, especially for engineers. Like I kind of, I can be critical of engineers sometimes, but you know, they tend to treat people like robots. Like, oh, well, if you didn't, it's like I wrote this procedure, I'm typing in this code, and you have to follow the code. And if you don't follow the code, you're broken. But again, like in principle, yeah, I guess you're right. But in real life, things don't work that way. People are not consistent. Like humans are just wired to be inconsistent and distracted like half the time. And if you don't take that into account when you're writing your procedures, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of raised a question for me, Nate. We've talked about a couple different psychological factors, from fear to habituation, those kind of things. And earlier you mentioned, the value of wearables enabling people to kind of automate that collection process and move past those psychological factors. But I'm curious if you've seen any types of wearables in the market that you like because of those benefits, or if you've used any. What has been your experience with using wearables to collect that kind of data?
Yeah, there's always the naysayers out there who they'll come up with any reason why to say, oh no, we can't use this because, you know. And as people get older, they typically crystallize in their thinking. It's rare to find an older person who is still fluid enough to learn new things. So like I have well, my grandfathers, for example, one of my grandpas has nothing to do with technology. He doesn't want a computer. He tried a computer, he hated it. It wasn't for him. And it's kind of too bad because I wish I could communicate with him through texting or email, but I can't because he's totally against any computers. He feels like the world's left him behind. And and my other grandpa, he loves technology and he has a computer and he asked me to help him set up a LinkedIn profile and all that. So it's complete, it's rare. People typically get set in their ways, and that's why you can't teach an old dog new tricks. That's where that comes from, because that's a natural part of human, is you tend to resist change, especially once you get older. They call that your fluid intelligence gets lower as your crystalline intelligence gets higher as you age. That's just typically what happens. So that's tough, because with the new technology and you get the older dogs, that aren't interested in that kind of thing, with the rare exception, but I was going to say something else and I just lost it.
That's all right. I'm guessing it'll come back to you. Let me take the
Yeah, related to using were there any wearables that you had seen or heard of, in your research that you thought would do a good job of maybe overcoming those psychological factors?
Right. So the other thing is, oh yeah, I remember. So just getting people to try it goes a long way, you know. Like for me, here's a wearable I use. It's an Apple Watch, and there's so many benefits to it. Yeah. Like for example, if I misplace my phone, I can ping my phone from my watch. If I misplace, because I use Apple TV, if I misplace the controller, that comes with this tiny little controller that fits perfectly in the side of the couch, it disappears. And I can control the TV with my watch. I have a built-in remote control, so it solved these age-old problems like where's the remote? You can solve these issues, right? Just the convenience of it. I think I'm really excited about technologies. I love the idea of wearables. I think they're still very, very new. I think most people haven't even really considered it. They don't even realize that they're using wearables sometimes. Like phones is in a sense a wearable, because you're always wearing it in a pocket essentially. But I'm really excited about the technology. And I think, like for example, augmented reality and virtual reality have all these other benefits to the workplace. So you could train somebody in virtual reality, they could die safely, right? And people don't realize the power of these technologies until they try them. Like I had my wife try something called Richie's plank experience. Have you heard of that?
Mm-mm.
I have done a VR plank experience, and just
So
FYI, I didn't jump off the plank. I knew it wasn't real, but I didn't jump. I was still
it's
that frightened.
it's amazing how
Yeah,
immersive it is. The
it's very.
power, yeah. That and so imagine if you're doing some kind of training in a VR setting where emergencies are happening. Maybe you're doing a pull top rescue. Anything with heights. Like at Iowa State University, they have that C6 machine. Tom, you're familiar with that.
Yep.
And
They
they
call it the
they
holodeck, right?
the holodeck, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I got to go in there. I was helping a fire chief with some training or with his PhD, and he was running firefighters through a simulation. And he said, "Well, you're a firefighter. Why don't you come in and help me out?" And he helped me in return with my master's degree thesis. But when I was in there, you're standing in this basically inside a dice. That's what it feels like, inside a box, and you become the remote control. So you anchor yourself in the middle, and then you step forward and you start to scroll forward. That's how you move through this environment. And they have this little maze that you start out so that you can get used to the controls. And as I was going through the maze, I accidentally went too close to the wall, but instead of hitting the wall and stopping like you in the real world, I suddenly ended up at the top of the wall. Like I just, for whatever reason, the way the computer program was worked, I ended up on this very slender pathway, very high up. And I remember they're like, "Oh, just walk back down just step off into the back." And I'm just like, I don't know if I want to do that. You know, it's so immersive. It's all three-dimensional and it's completely immersive. So it's a really good way, to apply technology. But people don't, back to the point, people don't realize the power of it until you tried it out. I think that's probably the biggest barrier.
I think it's fascinating, some of those applications. We've even worked with insurer partners that are using AR, VR headsets to train their inspectors and adjusters on what to look for in the field after a tornado wipes out a building or after there's a structure fire, that kind of thing. So you can put people in situations where they're not going to get hurt and have them experience their behavior, their reactions, practice, standard procedures. It is
Hmm.
really fascinating. Yep.
It's powerful stuff.
Yep.
And that reminds me when you said insurers, that's one of the thoughts I was having about wearables was I can put a telematics device on my vehicle and get a discount on my driving insurance if I drive well, right? Well, what about putting a telematics device on my body and getting a discount with my health insurance somehow? Do they do that? It seems like it'd be a
Um,
great way to
that's what
fight
we're
some of these
working
healthcare
toward.
costs.
We're working
Okay.
hard every day to try to figure out innovative ways for insurers, work comp insurers in this case, to operationalize our technology, and we're making great strides. And I think they're finding interesting ways to apply what we do. Um, you brought up telematics. It's fascinating. Would people be as willing to put a telematics device in their car if they knew that uh, if they didn't perform well or if their behavior wasn't safe, then they would be dropped or their rates were going to go up, right? So back to what you and I always end up talking about is communication, right? If it has a tendency or even the potential to be punitive, I don't think it works. I
Right.
think if it's a tool for gathering data that we can share in a non-confrontational, non-adversarial, non-accusatorial way, telematics are showing that on an app. Companies, after working with uh, that telematics data, just presenting it to the driver and giving them a score uh, has a dramatic result in them improving their own behaviors without being told to do so. So it's kind of fascinating. And yeah, we kind of talk about what we're doing as telematics for people on occasion. It helps insurers understand how they might be able to use MakuSafe, not to get off on that tangent. But as always, fascinating conversation with you. I was going to say, I just cracked open the latest edition of Occupational Health and Safety, and the first thing that caught my eye was an article called The Supervisor's Critical Role in Safety Performance, and it contrasts behaviors of effective frontline safety supervisors versus non-productive behaviors, and talks about positive communication, effective hazard identification, and the use of data and reporting in an effort to be better. But the thread here is exactly, even without bringing it up, is exactly what we always end up talking about, which is talking with your people in an ongoing way, in a positive way, so that you get that engagement and create a more positive safety culture.
Yeah, well, it comes down to a lot of it comes down to the system, like we were talking about before. If Deming is right and it's 90% system, 10% people, when you set this is my theory, when you set your goals on something negative, then you're probably going to have more negative interactions. You're trying to reduce a negative, you know. Michael Jordan was in an interview one time, and he made the game-winning shot at the end of a championship game. And they said, weren't you worried you were going to miss? And he goes, no, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he essentially said, when I say don't miss, my brain hears miss, so he visualizes what he wants to happen. He says it's going in, right? And in the same way, safety is very similar. You can track and say, let's fail less, which is what lagging data is. Like, let's have fewer injuries, right? Well, why are you going to focus on failure? Why are you going to focus on reducing failure rather than identifying the valued behaviors that lead to a better outcome and then building on those things, right? Yeah. Like a simple example is buckling your seatbelt. And I think, I talked to a UPS safety director one time, and that's one of the things that they would do. They would actually do observations in the morning after they loaded up their trucks from one of these depots that have all these UPS trucks. They would go out and stand on the corner and just observe, not in a punitive way, not to catch people, but they would observe what percentage of their drivers were wearing their seatbelts. And they would say, and then they would let people know, hey, we found that 95% of you were wearing your seatbelts. 5% of you were not. Let's get that to 96% tomorrow or the next day or whatever, and trying to build on those valued behaviors. Another one was, and this is kind of an interesting one, UPS doesn't want their trucks to turn left because they found that when they're crossing traffic, they get into more accidents. And there's also an increase in idle time. So instead, to turn left, they'll just keep making right turns. So something fun to see if you can catch your UPS driver making a left-hand turn. I don't think they're supposed to do that.
No,
so
time study, right? Scientific management. You can reduce, undesired outcomes if you put a better system in place, I guess,
yes.
to go back to what you were saying.
Yes.
Well, always fascinating to talk to you. Nicole, I'll kick it back to you.
Yeah, in our wearables, workforce wearables discussions, we talk a little bit about safety and needing a new definition of safety today. So I'm curious, Nate, what would be your new definition of safety today? What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think just shifting it away from what we don't want to happen and shifting it onto what we do want to happen. And that's going to look different for every business. So instead of saying safety is the absence of injuries, which is the way it's typically been done, safety is this and this and this that we know will result in lower injuries, a safer workplace. So it can be different for every business, but whatever that is, whatever those valued behaviors are, that's what it should be. That's how each individual company should define their safety as. And then you can promote those valued behaviors, and you can celebrate as a team, you can celebrate the achievement of doing the right things more or doing the right things better. And then then you're removing those communication barriers, you're removing those psychological barriers, the fear. And then if you have a culture like that, then employees aren't afraid to tell you when there's a problem, right? So, and also kind of going back to that on that point is it's counterintuitive, and you can't ever affect your outcomes directly, right? Unless you just fudge the numbers, which, is not very principled, right? But it doesn't make sense. And nobody talks like this. And if you look at other departments, you look at finance departments, they say, well, we want to have this much more revenue this year than we did last year, right? They're saying that is a measure of success, and they're trying to increase that measure of success rather than, and like safety is the only department that I know of, the only industry that I know of that says, let's reduce the number of failures. It just doesn't make any sense. It's counterintuitive. It's like being at a restaurant and your beer glass goes empty, and you say, hey, remove the negative space from my glass. Like, no, who says that? Like, nobody has ever said that ever.
Well, there's
Why
more
does-
and more
why does
and more
safety-
signs of people actually, espousing these values. I'll say that I read a great article. It was written by Corey Pitzer, I believe, but he had a new definition of safety, and he said it was expressed in an equation: safety equals R to the fourth, and the R was, an acronym that stood for responsiveness, resilience, risk. I may even forget what the fourth one was, but it was really talking about all of the things that we're talking about, right? Building that safety culture so that people espouse those values, understand risk, are constantly looking for it, and that becomes the prevailing attitude. And that should be our difference, or our different definition of safety for the future. So I appreciate what you're saying. I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, Corey Pitzer, I'm actually trying to set up a call with him. I was introduced to him through Jamie Young over at Safepedia. They know him, and they introduced me to him. So I'm excited to talk to him. He seems like a really interesting guy. So it's interesting you mentioned Corey.
Yep. And it never fails. Every time I bring up Corey and how much I liked his article, whoever I'm talking to says, "Yeah, I know Corey. I haven't met him yet, so maybe you can do the same for me." I'd love to talk.
Sure. I'll try. Yeah.
Cool. Well, good talking with you, Nate.
Yeah, thank you guys, and thank you, Tom. Thank you guys both so much for sharing your time and your expertise on this topic of safety in workforce wearables. You can find this episode and more at MakuSafe.com in our resources section. And don't forget, you can catch all of our upcoming episodes and be the first in the know by liking and following us on your social media platform of choice, whether that's Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Nate, if people want to follow along and learn more about safety with you, where should they connect with you?
Yeah, the best place, well, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, but my main place is LinkedIn. You can follow my hashtag Redbeard, or can just connect with me on LinkedIn. I accept virtually every single connection invite I get, unless it seems to be a bot or something like that. So connect with me on LinkedIn. And the other way would be to go to isitrecordable.com. There is a chat function in the lower right-hand corner, and that goes straight to my phone. So it's in effect, you can text me and ask me whatever question you want. And if you have a record-keeping question, I have a really quick turnaround time. If you don't feel like plowing through all of the record-keeping regulations and you just want a quick answer, submit it at my website and I'll get back to you typically within 15 minutes. So I'm pretty quick. But yeah, those are the best ways to reach out to me. And if you want to follow my antics, my Redbeard antics, that's the best way to do it.
There are some antics.
There are.
But
I like to have fun.
Yep. Well, thanks very much for spending time with us today. Really appreciate it. And as always, great to talk with you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And if you're looking for more information on workforce wearables, you can visit us at MakuSafe.com. Have a great day.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thanks.